Hello, fellow travellers of the Black Sun. My name is Andrew Novince, and this is walkthrough number 15 of my virtual reality project featuring the sets from Space 1999. This update comes just a few weeks before the 50th anniversary convention celebrations to be held in Los Angeles. And I'm happy to announce that this update finally brings the completion of the cockpit front window wall dials. It was a hard slog, but I'm so happy to have completed in time for the convention. Before we investigate the cockpit though, let me just point out that I do have a Discord server where people can join and participate in the work in progress images. The link to that Discord server is in the comments below the video. And also for those with a VR headset, you can download this project on the itch.io website, which is also linked in the comments below. Additionally to all of that, there is another way of experiencing this project, either in VR or in fact on a flat screen PC monitor with a keyboard and mouse. And you can do that through an app called VR Chat. Now, VR Chat is designed for socializing in VR, but it also has a mode where you can enter the VR Chat worlds through your flat screen monitor with a keyboard and mouse and a PC. To do that, you just need to have a Steam account, install VR Chat through Steam, create an account, enter VR Chat, and then there is a section in the menu for all the different worlds that are available for you to visit in VR Chat. And there are literally tens of thousands, if not 100,000 worlds that you can visit. But if you, in that user interface, if you search for Space 1999, you should find at least 3 of my worlds. There's one based on the main mission set. There's another one based on the Eagle passenger pod. And then there's a third one based on the Eagle passenger pod with the X5 computer. Now that third world is the one that includes the updated cockpit that I've just completed. So for those people who don't have a VR headset but were curious to see this on their own PC and explore in their own time, VR Chat might be an option for you. So having got all of that out of the way, let's go into the Eagle cockpit and explore. So if I bring up the menu, now again, I'll just point out to people that you can bring up this menu by clicking the top left button on your left controller, like that, and then point your right hand at the menu and you'll see a laser pointer coming out, and then there's these tabs across the top. So you've got your options tab, which allows you to change the color of the illuminated wall panels here. There is also a moon option for that globe over there, and all of this stuff I've pointed out before, but for anybody who hasn't seen this project before, this is kind of the interactivity that you can expect to see. Down here we have Eagle passenger pod, and this simply, you probably would have noticed the Eagle flying around this set through the windows, and you can change the different passenger modules and also including no passenger modules. The other thing that I quite like is this TV screen shots, and if you turn this on, you see in situ screenshots from the TV show which you can line up and compare this 3D virtual environment to the actual sets that were done in the 1970s. So that's pretty cool. And then there's also the slideshow, which really shows behind the scenes imagery on the big screen up there and also on the small screen down here. So, but we can turn that off. And then we can also turn on the various musical elements from the TV show down there. We have props. We also have the ability to change the strength of gravity for the props, which is down here. So if I go to the prop library and I bring up, let's say, a moon globe, there's that, and then we can throw that around and it falls. It basically falls at the moment at 1.6 meters per second, which is moon gravity. But you can change that to anything you like, and in fact, you can even set it to none. So if we go back to the props, go to the library, bring up another planet, now there is no gravity, and the planets just move without falling. Click on the planets again, and they go away. The moon buggy does not belong in this environment, but it's pretty funny to see it here. It reminds me of 2001 at the end there, where we see Dave Bowman, I think it is, in that white room. Anyway, so that's our props. We can go back, and then the other important tab is this locations tab here. And so here are the 6 locations that I have in this VR experience. We are currently in main mission, and there's that red border around it to indicate which scene we are currently in. You've all seen all these scenes before, but let's go to the X5 pod and cockpit scene. So we'll just click on that, and here we are. And all of this is unchanged from before, but you can see little videos playing in the comm lock. You can see steam coming out of the coffee cups. And there is the cockpit in the distance with all of the completed dials. Now let me just sit down for a moment, because it's a bit easier to access the dials and get closer to them from in a seated position. So let's go towards the cockpit. And here we are, the completed cockpit. In the previous update, I had all of this done. This console was completed. The only thing that wasn't done in the previous update were all of these dials on the front wall. Now, there are, as I mentioned in the introduction, there ended up being roughly 80 to 85 unique dials that needed to be modeled for this front wall. And then some of those dials are repeated over and over again. So some of them are repeated up to about, I think, 12 times or more. Others only exist once. So there was a little bit of economy in some of the dials and not so much economy in some of the others. So I don't know if I mentioned, but there was 300 dials in this front wall. It doesn't look like it, but it does add up very quickly. Now, the other thing that I did, which was novel to me, especially considering that I'm not a game developer, is in the past I would model whatever I'm modeling, and that would be the only model that exists, and I'd put that into VR. This time around, knowing that there would be so many dials and so much geometry, I thought I really would need to apply some sort of optimization. So game engines, such as the one that I use, which is Unity, excuse me, game engines have this concept called level of detail. And what they do is, from a far distance, they will have a very low resolution model, which is rendered into the scene. And then as you get closer and closer to objects, it dynamically swaps in slightly higher resolution models and then slightly higher resolution models and so on. And often they will have, and these are called level of details, or LOD, LOD 0, LOD 1, LOD 2, LOD 3, so on. I've only got 3 levels of detail that I used here, but a lot of games will have 5 or more. So this has been a bit of an experiment for me, and it is successful, but there is a little bit of pop-in as you see it transition from one level of detail to the other. Now, when you're moving quickly like this, you won't notice the pop-in at all. But there are certain points. So, for instance, you can see that rectangular dial there. As I move my head further away and move it closer, there's a little bit of pop-in of the different level of detail model, which is unfortunate. Maybe it's partly to do with my inexperience with level of details. But even in professional games, you often see pop-in. So it's a difficult thing to perfectly transition into. So there is those artifacts, which some people might notice, but it really is pretty minor. And when you move in quickly and so on, you won't notice. So I'm quite happy with having used this level of detail approach. But what it meant was that, yes, I had 80 unique dials to model, but then I had to model them a further 3 times at different levels of resolution. So the whole process became just, multiplied. And that's partly why it's taken me so long to finally complete this cockpit. Now, I had hoped to also complete the modelling of these chairs, which turned out to be a dentist's chair. But considering that the 50th anniversary is coming up so soon, I'm really not going to have time to even attempt these chairs. So I'll have to leave these chairs as I had them previously and release the project with the updated window wall there. So I think what a good thing to do might be is to simply give you a close-up view of each of these panels so that you can appreciate the work that's involved. As before, a lot of this text is this bog standard Letraset legal jargon that they have. So many of these dials are meant to be quite large, but the set dressers of the TV show, they used photographs of these dials, and they used the photographs at all sorts of scales. And so sometimes the dial is close to full scale like this, and other times they are as big as my thumb, which, this one here you can see is as big as the thumb. It's a particularly small dial. I mean, this would be impossible for any pilot to read. But I guess for the TV show, it kind of looked busy and it looked fancy and technical, and they did it this way. So I had to follow the scale that they used. But the model itself has all of the detail in it that you would see at full scale. So when you get really close in VR, all the detail is there. So I'm calling this panel number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then make our way around. I've got to say that I credit Jeffrey Morris for his documentary and his physical reproduction of the cockpit, which gave me a huge amount of motivation to complete my own cockpit. And then also Daryl Simmons, and I have to apologize to Daryl for my last video where I called him, I believe I called him Dennis. So sorry about that, Daryl. But Daryl's cockpit is just spectacular as well. So impressed, and they really helped me get motivated to complete this cockpit here. I have a friend on the Discord who's now feeding me images of Lost in Space, the chariot, and various elements there, and I think he's trying to entice me to start working on a Lost in Space VR experience. But anyway, here we are on the third orange panel. Now, a lot of the imagery for these dials was only possible because I was able to identify the dials through the photographs from the TV show. And I identified them by doing a Google reverse image search. And then that led me often to eBay sales of these dials. And on eBay, they will have photographs from all sorts of different angles and quite close-up photographs. So really, it was the photographs from eBay that allowed me to model these dials to the detail that you see here, rather than the photographs from the TV show. If I show you the photographs from the TV show, so we go to our menu, we go to screenshots, you can see here, in fact, this is a reasonably good photograph, but even in this photograph, there is no way that you can read any of the text. Whereas when I look at this same dial on eBay, I can then read that the text, in fact, does say, AT58, TSO, all of this stuff. So, as it turns out, let me just turn off this, I managed to identify pretty much every one of these dials, except for that one there, this one there. So every one of those dials is identified, and I have a model and make and number and all that sort of stuff for them. And then a lot of these are reused up here, which is great. But the difficulty with the dials around the windows is the only literally series of images that I had of those dials are the ones that look like this. And that is way too blurry to see any real detail. And so luckily, the dials down here repeated up there, and I could just vaguely see from the blurry shape that, yes, in fact, it was that dial, and therefore I could do the right addition of the right dial in the right spot. But there turned out to be about 10 of these dials which I couldn't identify that weren't reproduced down in this batch of dials down here. So I had to just do my best from, so this was one of the dials that I couldn't identify. So that's all I had to work with. And so if we look at how blurry that is, and then how I interpreted that blurry image, I ended up doing that. So so going back to these orange panels, this is pretty much the best image that we have from the TV show of the orange panels. Luckily enough, this entire prop still exists in reasonably good condition. I don't know who owns it. And we have photographs of the prop that extend to its full completeness rather than it being cut off like this, like it is here. And those photos are taken with a modern digital camera, and they're quite a bit higher resolution than what this is. And so it's from those photos that I was able to identify each dial and then model it and move on from there. Now, this is the photo from the TV shot, and you'll notice that this photo from the TV show has got this dial here, and then it's got those two dials there. Unfortunately, in the modern photography of the prop as it exists now, that dial there and these two dials have fallen off or are no longer on the prop. And what I've noticed is with the various cockpit reproductions that I found online, people have often gone with the photographs of the prop as it is now. And so they don't include these two or that one. But here in this photo from the TV show itself, from 1975, it clearly does have those two. And this is partly why I wasn't able to identify that particular dial there. It's because the only image that I have of that dial is this one, and that is way too blurry to identify. So it turned out that was the only dial that I wasn't able to identify, and all the rest I'm pretty sure I've got right. So that's the origin of the orange dials and their history of being created. And let's just continue with the individual panels. Now, sometimes you will see a little bit of blotchiness in these small details because I do this pre-calculated light baking in Unity, and those details are a little bit small sometimes for the light to properly shadow and illuminate. The other thing is too, because I end up modeling these dials at full scale, and all the little knobs, they have this knurling pattern on them. And I mean, these big dials, you see those ridges quite easily, but those ridges exist on pretty much in every case. So if I go, no, actually not on that one. I'll show you what I mean later on. If I get close enough, you can see the ridges on that, but when you move further away, it's so small, and you don't see that stuff. Anyway, just to continue. So this is actually 3 dials, all put together in a standard way. The other thing that I should mention too is there were pretty much I think I found about 4 different manufacturers. So there was Sperry, one of the companies that made these dials. There was Narco, which made a whole lot of these. So these are the Narco dials. Sperry, I can't think where there was some Sperry dials, but and then there was King, and King often was also associated with a company called Bendix. So you either saw King dials or you saw Bendix King dials. So there's King, Narco, Sperry, and then there was also a few Cessna dials, and then there was one Collins dial, which I wonder if this was the Collins one. No, I don't remember. Oh no, this was the Collins one, I think. And then, like I said, I've got 10 dials that I wasn't able to identify, so I don't know what they were. Okay. Just slowly moving my way through all the dials. Like I said, this dial I had to make up because I just didn't know what it was. And even with the photos from eBay, there's still a lot of the detail that I just couldn't make out. And yeah, I don't quite know how these are supposed to function. I'm sure I've got bits of that a little bit incorrect. I mean, this panel, I'm sure, in reality is probably about this wide. Even though it was such a long and laborious project, after completing each dial, it was such a pleasure to see it placed in its correct location. And it's funny, as I've been doing this, I'd see videos of, let's say, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and they'd show their dials, and I'd go, oh, I know that one. It's something that I'd been entirely unfamiliar with before doing this project. So that's the dials on the orange panels, and then I might as well go through the dials around the windows. These dials here were so similar to other pre-existing dials, dials that actually had three-dimensional form. So these were Sperry dials, and I wonder, so that one there looked like it was if we look at the screenshots, let's just do that. If you look at that screenshot there, it looks like a two-dimensional diagram, but based on this very dial here. So I use that as my template to create that dial, which is just like a flat, it's almost like an LCD modern screen, really, rather than the old analog dials that these are. So that one, and that one are really almost reproductions of some of these analog dials. Now, as usually happens in this thing, every episode will have slight differences. They would have moved things around and so on. And so there are other episodes or other versions of this photograph where they have these different graphic symbols on these dials. And so that was a perfect opportunity for me to reproduce the graphic symbols as they appeared there. But then the alternate versions I was able to then mirror over on this side. So these were actual versions of the graphics that appeared over there at some stage. And then I was able to put over on this side. Because of course in the TV show we never saw the right window. We always only saw this left window. But since I'm modeling this fully in 3D, I do have a right-hand window, and it worked out really well to put those additional graphic symbols here and here. That one is the same as on the other side. So let's systematically go through these dials. In fact, I think I've had these dials, these three in place last time. Before it goes to the dials, the other thing that I added, last time I had these air grills, but I added all of this extra busy paraphernalia, these labels and so on. So the dotted line is inspired simply by the dotted lines that were there, and these dotted lines that are actually on the on this window section. So those dotted lines inspired these dotted lines here just to make it look busy. And then that number there is a reproduction of that number there. This label is a reproduction of that label there, which in turn is that label there. And then these yellow labels on that side as well are a copy of what you see here and a copy of what you see there. So that was just added to make that shelf look a little bit busier and whatever. So here we are. Now, the rest of the dials around the window. This was one of the dials that I couldn't identify. And you can see it's repeated here, here, and there. And then the same on the other side. This dial I couldn't identify either. That one there. And there's a variant of that there and there. As you can see by that label, these are the King dials. And you can even see like the model number there, KMA20 TSO, or KX40, KWX40, KN74. Couldn't identify that dial. But if we look at the photograph, that's it there. So it looked like it had one of those spirit levels at the top, which is what I've done. And then the spherical navigation gyroscope thingy. Looks like it had a light section on the bottom, which is what I reproduced there. These three I couldn't identify. That one looks particularly bland. But if we look at the screenshot, again, this particular version doesn't include that particular dial, but there are plenty of other versions of this window which do have that dial, and it looked quite bland. Well, not bland is the wrong word. It didn't look highly detailed. So from the blurry image, that's all I could make out, really. Now those two were, I think, visible on there. Yep, they are. And again, that's the best image that I had for both those. And so that's what I came up with. And then these dials down here, thankfully, were a copy of some of the dials around this thing here. So I didn't have to identify these exactly because I could just see from the rough blurry images which ones were which. So and in fact the pattern of the dials, this model, that model, that model, that model, repeated there, and there. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 repeats, and then this is a smaller, narrower repeat with just 1 or 2 variations inserted. And since this was narrower, that then gave me the liberty or the idea to add these dials in here because it created more room for them. But we never actually saw these two. We never saw anything along this central axis in the photo. The photos did go a little bit further off to the side, but we never saw anything along here. So I was pretty much free to invent that. But again, not to go too wild. And so that is all the dials that have been added to the cockpit. So if we sit down in our pilot's chair, we have no chance of reading any of them because they're all too far away. And also have very little chance of interacting with them as well in terms of turning knobs and dials and so on. But that's what we have. One completed cockpit just in time for the convention. So I will be continuing this project. I really do need to finish this cockpit chair, and then this will be complete. And I think after that, maybe I will have a go at working on Lost in Space. We'll just have to see what happens. But for now, happy 50th anniversary, and I will see you all next time. Bye.